I still remember very clearly the day that I figured out that I was actually rich. It was in Haiti, and for reasons too complicated to share right now, I was spending about 3 hours outside the Port-au-Prince airport, kind of on a little traffic island. And during those 3 hours, I got acquainted with a lot of people. A lot of con artists, grifters, desperate people, evangelists. I talked to a lot of people. But none impacted me so much as the guy who came up to me and said, I will go get my children, and you can take them to America. You can take them, and they can eat well, and you can educate them, and then maybe they can come back and help Haiti. And I said, yeah, well, thank you. You may think that all Americans are wealthy, but I'm not. And he goes, yes, you're an American. You are wealthy, and my children are doing very poorly here. But in the United States, they will do well. I'll go get them. I said, no. Maybe you've seen American television, and it seems like everybody's really rich there. But honestly, I'm just a missionary. I'm just down here to help build a school building out of Green Guave. And he said, these 3 things show me that you're rich. And he pointed to my glasses, and he pointed to my wedding band, and he pointed to a watch I had on at the time. I'm rich because I have glasses. Without glasses, I couldn't have even seen who was talking to me. The wedding band, well, hey, it just kind of comes with the territory, right? You get married and you'll walk out with a wedding band. And the watch I'd picked up for $3 at Walmart just before the trip because, there aren't a lot of public timepieces there. He said, these 3 things show me that you're rich. And suddenly I had to rethink. I had to reconsider my perspective on things. I was in Haiti, a place where at that point people were average making about $1 a day if they were lucky. And where I forget the proportion now, a disproportionate number of kids, maybe 50% died before they were 6 years old. I was in a place where a little later, when I asked a kid whose family we were sponsoring if there was anything else he needed, having brought him school supplies and socks and so on, and he consulted with his mom and said, do you think there's any way you could send enough money that we could buy some concrete so we could have a floor in our house? Whew, he was right. I was and am rich, even though back in the States, we were shopping at yard sales to try to keep clothes on our growing daughters' backs. And even though Campus House was having to scrounge to just keep our doors open, in the big picture, I was rich. Perspective. Perspective is a really important thing. And it changes over time. For those of you who don't know me, and for those of you who do know me, I'm still Dave Embry. I've been hanging out with you all quite a bit. The very first time I worshiped with the Glendale Christian Church was the first Sunday of July, 1978. We had just moved in, my wife and I, my very pregnant wife and I, had just moved into a house on Normal Street to help get this thing called Christian Campus House off the ground. And I wanted to come to Glendale that Sunday. I didn't know where it was, so I stopped just the other side of Highway 65 at Ingram Mill Road at what was then a get and go, and asked them where the church was. They didn't know, so I used a payphone. For those of you who are young, we can explain that to you later. And I called Glendale, and they told me how to get there. Now, I didn't speak that Sunday, but a few Sundays later, I did. I got to talk about Campus House and what we were hoping to do, and you all started supporting us. Well, actually, you all had been supporting us. Christian Campus House would not exist without Glendale, and some of the people here who got together, people like Art Petty and others, and said, hey, let's do something over on the campus. And through the years, I've spoken here a lot, and the perspective has gone from a church I couldn't find to yet another part of my Christian family. And the length of time since my last time speaking here, just due to COVID and all sorts of things, I think has been the longest I've gone without speaking here since 1978. So I'm really, really glad to be back. But again, perspectives change. When I started out at Christian Campus House, I was 22 years old. I grew my first beard so that I'd look older than the students who actually were older than me. I was like everyone's brother. A few years later, I was like everybody's older brother. A few years later, young uncle, older uncle came along soon. When I hit my early 40s, I was sort of like everybody's dad. But honestly, it was within the last 6 or 7 years maybe, that a mom who was very excited at her daughter's graduation said, Dave, Campus House has meant so much for my daughter. She has grown so much spiritually here. The staff and students are like her extended family, and you're just like an extra grandfather. And maybe then is when I thought, it's time for me, perhaps, to do something else. And so I am moving away. I stopped being the director of Campus House the end of May this year. I'm still on staff another year to help put things away, organize things. As I've been telling a lot of people, I'm the only one who knows where all the bodies are buried, if I could just remember. And so I'm going through closets and file cabinets and old hard drives and if any of you guys have a 5 1/4 floppy drive and the WordStar program, that might be useful to me in my electronic archaeology that I'm doing right now. But we have a really, really fine staff at Christian Campus House. They're all people, except for one. Our newest staff member is the only one who didn't come up through our ministry or the one at Columbia. She's a young woman who just graduated from Bible college and is our first Gen Z staff member. So expect things to get even better. But one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here is to communicate to you that just because Dave's stepping away, the face you've associated with a long, long time, that doesn't mean Campus House is going to be hindered in any sense. In many ways, it's like we finally got the old guy out of the way, now we can do something. And we are not bringing anybody else up specifically in the role of director. We have 6 other people on staff, and they're sharing kind of a co-directorship, and we're gonna see how that works. One of those is with me today, and this over here, you're gonna have to come forward because you're kind of in the recesses of the smoke machine and so on. This guy is Ben Bunton, one of our men's ministers. Tyler Richter's the other men's minister, who most of you know, him having grown up here. But I'm trying to get out into all the churches that support us, and we are so grateful for Glendale and you who individually support us. We want you to know that, though you may be used to old face of Campus House, this is new face of Campus House. So when you think of Campus House, if you want to think about the old days, think of this face. If you want to think about what's new, cutting edge, and exciting right now, think of that face, Tyler Richter, Molly, and the rest of the group. So new face of Campus House, Ben, thank you. So we are talking about money, and we're talking about parables. And I think it was very convenient of Andrew on the Sunday when you are going to be talking about one of the most controversial and perhaps confusing parables to say, oh, hey, I'll be in Arkansas. Yeah, that's the ticket. And, maybe they are, who knows. But anyway, I get to speak about what is often called the parable of the shrewd steward, though as I spend a lot of time with this, I came up with a couple other names for it. The parable of the Rascals, because it's not just the steward. Everybody in this is a little bit shady. And, of the vintage I am, when I think Rascals, I think Stooges, because the Little Rascals and the Three Stooges were on TV after school about, right after the other. And there are some moments in this where you can kind of see the steward going, whoop, 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 we got to come up with a plan here because this is not normal. Maybe the parable of the mad scramble, because that's what happens here. Let me set up the context a little bit. The whole context of this parable goes all the way back to the beginning of chapter 14 of Luke, where Jesus is at a banquet hosted by some Pharisees. Now, over the next couple of chapters, Jesus, he intersperses some non-parable teaching, but it's mostly parables for 3 whole chapters. And it starts out, each one says he was talking to the Pharisees or he was talking to his disciples, and it says at one point he's talking to the teachers of the law, at another point it says he addresses those who'd been following him, but we don't know for sure if they're moving around. This is not Mark. Okay, Gospel of Mark probably is actually the Gospel of Peter. The illiterate Peter probably kind of dictated at least part of it to Mark. And I can just hear Peter, the old fisherman, saying, well, let me tell you another story. You know, we went up here and we healed this guy, and then we had to cross over the lake, and we cast out the demons over here. And then, there were too many people around, so we got down to the other side of the lake, and there's a storm on the water, and then we went over here. And so in Mark, there's a lot of motion, going here, going there. In this part of Luke, the whole thing may have taken place at one setting. And Jesus just kind of specifically addressing different people in the crowd. Now, I bring that up because as we're talking about this, whether we're disciples, whether we're seekers, whether we're teachers, maybe there's even a Pharisee or two among us, Jesus is talking to us, not somebody else. Now, it starts out talking about banquets, 3 parables about banquets, and Jesus talks about who to invite and where to sit and all these sorts of things. But the bottom line is kind of don't think you're all that. They're about humility. They're about who we are in the presence of God. And then he talks about the cost of discipleship, which we all need to be reminded of because we tend to lean pretty heavily on saved by grace and sometimes make that the get out of hell free card. And boy, got that in my pocket. I'm good, on with life. He's talking to people who are there who don't know that God can love them. And he tells the 3 lost parables, the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son in chapter 15. And then he gets to this parable. This parable that's just a little bit weird. And again, if you can imagine, maybe he's still sitting in here in the banquet hall and his disciples are nearby because they don't want Jesus to get jumped or something. And, the teachers of the law, they're hanging out nearby because they want to be Pharisees. They're apprentice Pharisees. And then the rest of the people may be standing outside the door saying, what's going on in there? So Jesus tells them this slightly odd story, beginning with verse 1 of chapter 16. All right. Jesus told his disciples, but that doesn't mean the Pharisees weren't listening in. And as a matter of fact, they respond to him later, so we know they were listening in. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. I'm going to pause just a moment. I don't really listen to a lot of country music, but a few years back, okay, it's been a long time ago now, I heard a song by a band named BR549 called Too Lazy to Work, Too Nervous to Steal. And that's this guy, except he's not too nervous to steal, but he's too proud to beg. So for those of you who know the song, you can hum it to yourselves as I proceed through the text. Too nervous to work, too prideful to beg. Okay, he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 400. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. This guy's sharp. He doesn't say, hey, give me that. No, he has them do it in their handwriting. Plausible deniability all the way, except the master figured it out. The master, though, commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, this is Jesus speaking, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. What? What? Okay, now let's just get one thing out of the way that'll make things a whole lot easier. First of all, the Master, or if you happen to be reading the King James, the Lord, is little l, little m. This is the guy in the story. This is not Jesus. This is not God saying, by all means, cheat, steal, manipulate, and deceive. No, 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 no. This is just part of the story, part of the anecdote that's being told. And Jesus said, people of this world, they know how to get by. Sometimes better than we do. They take some things more seriously, maybe than we do. Okay, so let's get some details down. The steward is already fleecing the boss man. The boss man figures out the guy's going to be out on the streets. He's too nervous or too lazy to work, too prideful to beg, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna come up with a plan. I'm gonna be their best friend. He could have done this before, but he didn't. Why not? It's because he was living in a different world just a few minutes before. A world where he was in control, a world where he had a plan. Now, obviously this guy's maybe my age, although back then my age was like 40 or something, because you got too old to work, sometimes really, really young. Maybe he wanted to build a little house by the Sea of Galilee and get a little fishing boat, so that he could retire in style, and suddenly that wasn't going to be the plan anymore. In a perfect world, at this moment, I would show you a video clip. By perfect world, I mean one where copyrights do not infringe so much. So if you have ever seen the movie The Three Amigos, I'm going to refer to a scene that you'll remember. If you haven't seen the movie, I'll try to describe it briefly. The movie is based on the idea that these 1920s actors have made it big in the silent movies, but now that talkies are in, they're out of a job. They were flamboyant cowboy sorts of guys, and now they're out of a job. And some people in Mexico have seen their films and they think it's real. And they're being menaced by this really tough bad dude named El Guapo, the handsome guy. And so they send for the Three Amigos to come down and welcome them. So the Three Amigos, they're out of a job, they are offered some money, so they go to Mexico to do a show, they think. And when El Guapo and the Three Amigos face off, Steve Martin goes over and says, it's a pleasure working with you, because he thinks they're actors too. So the Three Amigos go riding about on their horses, they're making circles, they're firing blanks into the air, and El Guapo leans over to one of his guys and says, I like these guys, they're funny, just kill one of them. And so his right-hand guy pulls a gun, points it at Steve Martin, fires, he falls off his horse, and what's going on? And so the other guys pick him up, and he's bleeding. And he goes, look at this, blood. So he walks over to El Guapo and the guy, and he says, that was a live round, that wasn't a blank. And they're all laughing, the Mexican guys, and he says, let me see that gun. And so he opens it up, opens up the revolver chamber, and it's like, these are live rounds. I'll take these. And he puts them in his pocket, and they're still laughing. And it suddenly occurs to Steve Martin, it's real. This isn't a game. This isn't a show. This is real. And he says, excuse me. And he goes back to the other amigos. And he says, it's real. And they say, what do you mean it's real? He says, these are real bad guys. And they really are going to kill us. And instead of riding in circles and shooting guns over their head, they all start weeping. And they eventually go back to El Guapo and beg for their lives. And everything changes. That word or that phrase, it's real, is something that we need to come to grips with. What is real? And how are we living? Are we really living in line with eternal realities? Are we playing games? Are we thinking real bad, real tough, riding around in circles, firing guns over our heads? What does it take? For some people, maybe a heart attack. For some people, somebody else's heart attack. All sorts of things can happen that suddenly slam us in the face. And we say, it's real. That's what happens to this guy. And suddenly, Suddenly, he's got to come up with a different plan. His nicely laid plans have fallen to pieces, and he's got to do something different. And some of us may say, okay, this guy was a crook, this guy was a cheater. Well, so were the clients, and maybe so was the boss, since he said, hey, good job here. But before we judge them too harshly, okay, haven't you watched Ocean's 11? Haven't you perhaps enjoyed Gone in 60 Seconds? Maybe if you're a little older, you watched The Sting or The Blues Brothers or The Italian Job, either version of it. We all see times where we root for the bad guys. We all can admit there are times where we look at the cleverness of people getting out of a situation or creating a situation. That's what Jesus was saying. He was telling a story that these people would understand, where all of them would go, yeah, it's pretty sharp. Jesus said the people of this world are more clever in achieving their goals than believers are. They're more focused, they're more diligent, often more enthusiastic about recruiting others to join the gang. Maybe we aren't so evangelistic sometimes because it really hasn't occurred to us how real it is. Jesus in Matthew 10:16 said to be as wise as serpents, as innocent as doves. Maybe sometimes in the church we get that confused. Maybe sometimes we're as wise as doves and innocent as serpents, and some guy's out there with 410 trying to take us down. Okay, MacGyver. Let's talk about MacGyver just for a few moments. Again, we can talk about the old version or the new version. And I think maybe all of you at least know that word. I mean, it's become a verb in English, to MacGyver something. And in both cases, old show, new show, you've got this guy who just can put pieces together to get out of virtually anything. You know, he's in a scrape, and he's always in a scrape. You know, I had no idea there were so many nuclear weapons in the world that just happened to show up places. And what's he got? A pack of gum, a fire extinguisher. He's always got a fire extinguisher. And a cow, you know. So how do you take those three things and put them together and get out of the circumstance? He does. And we watch the show and we go, yeah, that's so cool. Okay, are we that diligent with our lives? Okay, let me just tell you something. It's real. Life passes by quickly. To me, you know, it seems like 10 years since 1978. The years go by quickly. And either Jesus is coming back or we're going to go see him way sooner than it's ever been in our lives. It's real. Are we living our lives as if we believe that to be real? It's time to take care of some business here. And maybe it's time to MacGyver our way. Jesus says to use earthly wealth to make friends in heaven. What? All you have to do is pay a fee? All right, Luther was wrong. You know, indulgences are real. Let's all get on payment plans and probably at zero interest. All right, we can make that happen. No. We can't bribe our way into heaven. We can't buy our way into heaven. We are saved by grace. And yet, Scripture talks a lot about how what we do here reflects on where we are in relationship to God. Do we truly live like God is the creator and God is the one to whom before whom we'll all stand? Do we really regard Jesus as capital L Lord in the way we make our decisions and everything? Jesus did talk about money a lot, not just these parables that we're covering over these few weeks, but Jesus talked about money more than anything else except the kingdom of God. In Matthew chapter 6, that other really long sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, don't lay up for yourself treasures on earth. You know, stuff's just going to decay. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moths and rust do not corrupt and thieves do not break through and steal. What's in heaven? What can we lay up there? Well, okay, God's in heaven. So anything we do to honor, praise God, God's glory, anything we do to make God's glory known on this earth is just a reflection of what's going on in heaven. Ideally, we will be in heaven. So anything we do that furthers our submission to Jesus, our allegiance to God. What about our friends? What about our friends? Do we and family members, do we care about them enough? to invest in their lives whatever it takes to see them following Jesus. Jesus in Matthew 25 tells a parable of the sheep and the goat. That's not a parable necessarily, the sheep and the goats. He talks about the end judgment, where he says, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. These things are the things that matter. And here we are, we're on a sinking ship called human life, and it's time for us to MacGyver our way into something different. We all may say, yes, I'm here at church, Dave. Obviously I'm concerned about spiritual things. And that's good. I'm glad you're all here. But are you at church out there too? And are you as focused on spiritual things on Monday as you are on Sunday? What is it that motivates you? What is it that gets you out of bed in the morning? What is it that you think about as you lie down at night? What is it that obsesses you enough that sometimes you can't sleep because you're thinking about it? And I'm not talking worry here. I hope I make it. I'm just saying, okay, I live in God's world. What can I do to bring about his glory even more day to day? So when I was 16, 1972, I got my first car, 1968 Mercury Comet, and it had an AM radio. I lived in Northeast Missouri. There weren't a lot of good stations, but I could get sometimes WLS out of Chicago, and I could get WHB out of Kansas City. And back then, there may still be, I don't know, there was a place called CMC Stereo. And CMC Stereo, back in 1972, had specials all the time on these. For those of you who are young, this is an 8-track tape player. This is several technologies back, and it was a pretty awful technology. But it was all we had at the time. And I laid awake at night thinking, if I can get a CMC 8-track tape player in my car, it just won't be AM radio that fades in and out and has lots of static. I can listen to Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago and Bob Dylan and, okay, even then Led Zeppelin and so on. And I talked my parents into taking me to Kansas City, and I spent my $29.95 for this, and I installed it in my car with 2 rear speakers on the back deck, and I became known as the guy who could install 8 tracks, and I installed them for all my friends. And it was pretty glorious for 3 or 4 years. And then cassette decks started coming out, and they were much less hassle and so on. And this wound up in a box that's now been through several living places with me, but I still can't throw it away because I spent $29.95 for it, and I obsessed over it. I'm not here to advertise stereos, but I am here to ask that question. What is it that you obsess over enough to come up with some way to make it happen? That's what Jesus is talking about in this parable. We all have choices of what we can do with our lives, and God doesn't call us all to the same thing. I did double check and made sure that back on the wall you've still got your missionaries out there. I know all those guys. Many of them I've spent a good bit of life with, and I'm excited about that. All those are people who could have done other things with their lives. All those are people who are very smart, people who had all sorts of earthly opportunities, and they've chosen to share the gospel in particular ways. I'm not at all saying they're more spiritual than you are, but they've had to work hard to get where they are. They have to work hard to stay where they are. Okay, they're good MacGyvers for the kingdom of God, and I would encourage you to be as well. In America, money is the standard by which we assess value, and obviously somebody who makes $250,000 a year is way better than somebody who makes $25,000 a year. No, they aren't. No, they aren't. It's really ultimately about how are they connected to God. We got to live in the real world. We've got to understand what is real. This has changed a little bit, but on the Missouri State campus, for years and years and years, there was something that happened a couple of times a year called Humans versus Zombies. And people would sign up for it, and they would wear different colored ribbons. Some would be humans, some would be zombies. They would shoot each other with Nerf guns. And when Humans versus Zombies was going on, the campus was an entirely different place. I would literally, I teach part-time for the university. I would have people not show up for class sometimes for a week or two because they were afraid they were going to get ambushed on the way there. You would walk out of a classroom building and you would see students hiding behind bushes because they were trying to ambush somebody on their way to or from class. And for a couple of weeks, you heard shrieks all over campus as people were like, I can't believe he got me. Okay, it was a game. But people built their whole lives around it as long as it existed. And if you were the last living human or zombie, great was your reward somewhere, not in heaven, maybe not so much on earth. All of us do that. We get caught up in games. We get caught up in playing around. But it's real. Okay, it's real. This world has real consequences. You've probably heard Jim Elliot's quote, that man is no fool who gives up that which he cannot keep for that which he cannot lose. That's true. So what? Okay, Dave, you're out of time. Wrap it up. All right. We got to start with that idea, that eternity is real, and that we are actually living in eternal time, even while we're walking on this planet, even though sometimes we get caught up in humans versus zombies and we forget that. We get into the games. We are rich in the world's standards. And yes, there are times we got to make some sacrifices to keep a roof over our heads and so on. But generally speaking, we have enough. God has been really good to us. And we need to also reimagine perhaps what we mean by enough. Is it enough to live like Haitians, or is it enough to live like Bill Gates or somebody? We've got to figure out what is a just, what is an adequate level of living in this world. We've also got to realize that though we are rich, we are stewards, not owners. We are stewards of our money. We're stewards of our time. We're stewards of our intelligence. We're stewards of the power that God's given us. Let me give a little shout out here to a book. If you want to go into this much more thoroughly, there's a book called Playing God, Redeeming the Gift of Power by Andy Crouch that I've read, I think, 3 times now, and every time it kicks me in the rear. What he basically says is, okay, as Americans, even as Christians, we have a lot of power compared to other people in the world. But what are we doing with it? Material wealth is useful. Jobs are good. They give us circles of influence for evangelism. They give us resources so that we can indeed share with this congregation. We can share with missionaries on the field. We can share with other ministries who are benefiting God's people in need. But maybe sometimes we're playing humans versus zombies. Sometimes we're caught up in riding around on horses, shooting guns over heads. Maybe we need some other people in our lives to hold us accountable on this. As an upper middle-aged, maybe lower elderly-aged guy, I don't know where I am, I can tell you that in my life it's been hard. And everybody I talk to about this acknowledges that it's hard. And maybe on our own, we are super good at justifying our own actions and our own expenditures and what we do with money. Maybe this is an area where we need accountability as much as we do about telling the truth or what we're watching online or whatever. Getting together with some other people and talking through this and together MacGyvering our own futures so that we are sure we are doing with our lives that which honors the kingdom of God. Use up our lives. Use up our lives. Jesus also in the Sermon on the Mount basically said, whose praise do you want? Well, ultimately, that's whose praise you're going to get. What are we going to do with our stuff? No. What are we going to do with God's stuff that we happen to have in our possession? Andrew Carnegie, not a Christian, but a guy who had some understanding about money, said, the man who dies rich dies disgraced. George Eastman of the Eastman Kodak Company, again, for you kids, that used to be a big-time company, said, men who leave their money to be distributed by others are pie-faced mutts. I'm going to start using that insult. Pie-faced mutts. I want to see the action during my lifetime. Yeah. Jesus said, to wrap up this text, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So, if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? I tell you, Jesus said, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Let's pray.